Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're exploring the incredible spiritual journey and leadership of a man who embodied one of the most, mind-bending paradoxes in modern religious history. I want you to imagine this. You are a man whose face is recognized by literally millions of people. Your portrait hangs in countless homes, shops, and churches. Yet, at the end of the day, your absolute deepest desire is to just be left completely alone in a desert cave. I mean, it sounds almost impossible, right? How does a person reconcile a massively demanding public presence with an overwhelming, almost primal drive for absolute solitary silence? Well, that is exactly the puzzle we're going to solve today, as we dive into the life of Abba Kyrillos.
To really grasp the sheer scale of his influence, just take a look at this photograph. This is Pope Kyrillos VI, the 116th Coptic Patriarch. During his primacy, we're talking about a man who was the spiritual leader for up to 8 million Egyptian Christians. 8 million! He carried the heavy, historical weight of the Sea of St. Mark on his shoulders. Even today, if you go to Egypt, his image is absolutely ubiquitous. Postcards, posters, prayer cards, you name it. But, as we're going to see, the man dressed in this grand patriarchal attire was fundamentally forged by a monastic tradition that valued total obscurity above absolutely everything else.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the wild, almost unbelievable contrast of his public life. Here is a guy who is photographed rubbing shoulders with monumental world leaders, people like Egypt's President Gamal Abdel Nasser and Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. You'll find depictions of him in church shops casually calming majestic imperial lions, and in other portraits, riding a donkey in the Mariat Desert looking like a messianic figure. He spent 68 years of his life almost entirely in Egypt. But here is the major catch. Out of those 68 years, 3 whole decades were spent completely hidden away as a monk and a solitary. He was, quite literally, a global figure who just yearned for a hidden life.
Moving into Section 1, an ascetic in the city.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because to understand how this global leader was formed, we actually have to go back to the very beginning. Long before he was Pope Kyrillos, he was a young man named Azer Yussef Atta, born back in 1902 in a small village in the Delta province. And his early life, it might actually surprise you. On the outside, Azer was a highly successful corporate city worker in Alexandria. He worked for the famous travel agency Thomas Cook & Son. He was known for his solid English, his straightforward manner, and managing high-end British customers. Get this, he even sported a dapper mustache and wore the traditional red fez of a white-collar worker. But on the flip side, he had a secret night routine. Behind closed doors, he kept his modern city bedroom looking exactly like a barren monastic cell. He spent his free time obsessively reading the lives of the Desert Fathers, eating barely anything, and secretly ditching his comfortable bed to sleep on the hard floor. It's like he was living a spiritual double life.
I want to read this quote directly from the source material because it really hits the nail on the head regarding his mindset. He was absorbed by the love of the Lord. This love was manifest when he started practicing the life of solitude in his private room, being content with little food, and abandoning his comfortable bed for the floor. The main takeaway for us here is that his profound spiritual journey didn't just magically switch on when he finally reached the remote desert. Not at all. The heavy foundations of his extreme discipline and asceticism were built right there, smack in the middle of a bustling modern city while working a 9-to-5 corporate day job.
Eventually, though, Azer's pull toward the desert just couldn't be contained anymore. His family and his bishop actually tried to talk him out of it. They were terrified the desert would be way too harsh for a city boy. But in 1927, he finally got permission. And I absolutely love this next detail. On his final train ride out to the desert, he ran into a poor train conductor who couldn't afford a fez. So Azer literally took the fez right off his own head and handed it to him. Then he took off his jacket and gave it to the train driver. This wasn't just a nice act of charity. It was a powerful, symbolic shedding of all his worldly comforts and his entire corporate identity.
Which brings us to Section 2, entering the monastic tradition.
That specific train ride officially marked his entry into the ancient Coptic monastic tradition. He was leaving the modern world in the dust to step into an environment that hadn't really changed for centuries. He arrived at a place called Al-Baramis, widely known as the Monastery of the Romans. Now, this wasn't just some random spot on the map. It was the earliest monastic settlement in the entire desert of Scetis, and that name carries some serious historical weight. According to Coptic tradition, it's named after Maximus and Domitius, the actual sons of the Roman Empire Valentinian. These two princes traded the absolute pinnacle of global imperial wealth and power for the harsh, brutal reality of monasticism. For young Azer, that historical parallel was everything. His logic was basically, hey, if the emperor's sons can give up the purple robes of Rome, I can for sure give up my desk job at Thomas Cook.
But when he joined the monastery, it's not like he started at the top. Far from it. His first assignment? The kitchen, baking bread. He served incredibly humbly, and eventually he was ordained as a monk named Abuna Mina. His sharp intellect definitely didn't go to waste, though. He was soon assigned to assist the monastery's eminent librarian, who was a brilliant scholar. Under that guidance, Mina spent hours meticulously hand-copying the ancient texts of St. Isaac the Syrian, and then physically binding them for the library. This perfectly shows how his future leadership work was initially forged through this intense combination of extreme, humble service and rigorous academic discipline.
Now, I mentioned a moment ago that he was baking bread. More specifically, he was known for preparing the korban. In the Coptic tradition, the korban is the bread of the Eucharist. The monks prepare several loaves, but the priest selects only one for consecration during the liturgy. For Abuna Mina, the physical, hands-on act of making this bread became a constant tactile reminder of his own desperate need for spiritual food. From this very early stage, the daily celebration of the Eucharist became the absolute immovable center of his spiritual life and his daily routine.
That takes us right into Section 3, the solitary spiritual journey.
The thing is, for Abuna Mina, even the unbelievably strict routine of a desert monastery simply wasn't quiet enough. He felt this profound, undeniable calling to go deeper into complete physical isolation. Let's move to and see how this builds over just a few short years. In 1928, he's a monk in the community. By 1931, his intense dedication is recognized and he's ordained as a priest. But he is constantly seeking more isolation. By 1932, he requests and is actually granted permission to leave the monastery walls entirely. He retreats to a totally empty limestone cave in the desert, previously inhabited by a famously ascetic monk. And his journey into silence doesn't even stop there. By 1936, we find him living completely alone in an abandoned windmill.
So you might be wondering, why would anyone do this? Why choose an empty, freezing limestone cave or a ruined, drafty windmill over a supportive community? The source text brings in a beautiful concept by the writer Thomas Merton to explain this. Solitaries are free men who have become free by paying the price of freedom. For Abuna Mina, the extreme physical deprivation of the cave wasn't some kind of self-punishment, not at all. It was just the necessary price he had to pay to achieve absolute, unfiltered freedom with and for God. It was in that total, crushing silence that he felt he could truly intercede for the church and the rest of the world.
However, global events have a funny way of interrupting even the most isolated hermits. In a rather surprising and, honestly, slightly humorous twist of history, Abuna Mina's time in the abandoned windmill was abruptly cut short. During World War II, British forces operating in Egypt forced the solitary monk to pack up his things and leave his windmill. Why? Because the military command genuinely thought this intensely quiet, highly isolated hermit might actually be an enemy spy. There's just no way around it. It's a fascinating moment where the absolute chaos of a global conflict collided head-on with his silent spiritual journey. And now for our final section, the Hermit Patriarch.
This brings us to the final, and really the most remarkable chapter of our explainer. Because how does a man who was literally kicked out of a windmill for being too isolated end up as the leader of millions of people? And this brilliantly illustrates the absolute core of his identity. When Abba Mina was eventually elevated to the highest seat of power in the Coptic Church to become Pope Kyrillos VI, he simply didn't change who he was. People who expected this dynamic, extroverted, glad-handing politician, well, they were sometimes disappointed. Why? Because the patriarch remained a monk. He brought the exact same quietism, pietism, and deep absorption in prayer straight from his limestone cave right into the center of the patriarchal palace.
If we contrast this with how we usually view leadership today, it is honestly mind-blowing. Think about it, modern corporate leadership completely relies on outward ambition, relentless networking, and highly visible daily management. But Abba Kyrillos' executive toolkit? It was the exact opposite. His leadership work was entirely fueled by inward silence, deep, solitary contemplation, and his unwavering, day in and day out commitment to the Eucharist. He didn't lead by shouting the loudest in a boardroom. He led through the overwhelming spiritual authority that he had meticulously cultivated during all those decades out in the desert.
So the crucial point is just how incredibly effective this silent leadership actually was. And the source text makes a staggering comparison to drive this home. It states that Abba Kyrillos' importance for modern church history in Egypt is the equivalent of Mao Zedong's in contemporary Chinese history. Now, regardless of the heavy political weight of that name, the point here is strictly about the scale of total institutional transformation. This solitary, quiet hermit radically and fundamentally reshaped an entire modern institution. The booming, vibrant Coptic church that we saw in Egypt at the end of the 20th century was, quite literally, the church created by his quiet, spiritual primacy.
Which leaves us with a really profound question to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. We live in a world that constantly tells us we need to be loud, we need to be highly visible, and we need to be constantly networking to make any real impact. But can the most powerful forms of leadership actually be born out of complete silence and hiddenness? The incredible life of Abba Kyrillos strongly suggests that the answer to that is a resounding yes. It turns out true influence might just begin the moment we are willing to step away from all the noise. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this sparks your curiosity to learn even more about the undeniable power of the solitary life.